Good morning, class. Today we are going to continue with our read aloud. We are going to work on the chapter 3 of Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. This chapter is called The Family Dog. Nobody ever came right out and said that Fudge was the reason my dad had lost the Juicy O account. But I thought about it. My father said he was glad to be rid of Mr. Yarby. Now he could spend more time on his other clients, like the Toddlebite Company. My father was in charge of their new TV commercial. I thought maybe he could use me in the commercial since I know how to stand on my head, but he said he wasn't planning on having any headstanders in this commercial. My grandma taught me to stand on my head when I spent the night at her house. I can stay up for as long as 3 minutes. I showed my mother, my father, and Fudge how I could do it right in my living room. They were all very impressed, especially Fudge. He wanted to do it too. So I turned him upside down and I tried to teach him, but he always tumbled over backwards. Right after I learned to stand on my head, Fudge stopped eating. He did it suddenly. One day he ate fine, and the next day he said, "No, eat." And he said that to my mother. She didn't pay too much attention to him until the 3rd day that this kept happening. When he still refused to eat, she got very upset. "You've got to eat, Fudgy," she said. "You want to grow up and be big and strong, don't you?" "No grow," Fudge said. That night my mother told my father how worried she was about Fudge. So my father did tricks for him while my mother stood over his chair, trying to get a little bit of food into his mouth. But nothing worked, not even juggling the oranges. Finally, my mother got a brilliant idea. She thought maybe if I stood on my head, then she could feed Fudge. I wasn't very excited about standing on my head in the kitchen because the floor is awfully hard in there. In the living room we have carpet, but the floor in the kitchen is made of tile. But my mother begged me. She said, "It's very important for Fudge to eat. Please, please help us, Peter." So I stood on my head. When Fudge saw me upside down, he clapped his hands and he was laughing. When he opened his mouth, just like that, that's when my mother stuffed some baked potato inside of it. But the next morning, I put my foot down. "No, I don't want to stand on my head in the kitchen or anywhere else," I added. "And if I don't hurry up, I'm going to be late for school." "Don't you care if your brother starves to death?" my mother said. "No," I told her. "Peter, that is an awful thing to say. He's your brother." "Oh, well, I think he'll eat when he gets hungry enough. Why don't you just leave him alone?" That afternoon when I came home from school, I found my brother on the kitchen floor playing with boxes of cereals and raisins and dried apricots. My mother was begging him to eat. "No, no, no," shouted Fudge. "He made a terrible mess and he dumped things on the floor." "Please stand on your head, Peter," my mother said. "It's the only way he'll eat." "No," I told her, "I'm not going to stand on my head any more." I went to my room and closed the door. I played with my turtle Dribble until supper time. Nobody ever worries about me the way they worry about Fudge. If I decided not to eat, they probably wouldn't even notice. That night during dinner, Fudge hid under the kitchen table, and he said, "I'm a doggy! Woof, woof, woof!" It was hard to eat with him under the table because he was pulling on my legs. I waited for my father to tell him to stop, but he never said anything. Finally, my mother jumped in. "I know," she said. "If Fudgy's a doggy, he probably wants to eat from a bowl on the floor, right?" If you ask me, Fudge had never even thought about that, but he liked the idea a lot. He barked and he nodded his head. So my mother fixed him a plate and she put it by him underneath the table. Then she reached down and she petted his head like he was a real dog. My father said, "Aren't you carrying this a little too far? I really think he needs to just behave, sit up, and eat at the table." My mother did not answer my father. Fudge ate 2 bites of his dinner. That made my mother pretty happy. After a week of having him eat under the table like this, I felt like we had a real dog in the house. I thought how great it would be if we could trade in Fudge for a nice, soft puppy. That would solve all my problems. I would walk the puppy, I would feed him and play with him. He could even sleep at the edge of my bed at night. But, of course, that was just my imagination. My brother is here to stay. and there's nothing much I can do about it. Grandma came over with a million ideas about how to get Fudge to eat. She tricked him by making milkshakes in the blender. When Fudge wasn't looking, she threw in an egg. Then she told him that if he drank it all, there would be a surprise at the bottom of the glass. The first time, he believed her. He finished his milkshake, but all he saw was an empty glass. There wasn't a surprise. Fudge got mad, and he was upset. After that, Grandma left. The next day my father dragged Fudge into Dr. Cone's office. He told her to leave him alone, that Fudge would eat when he got really hungry. I reminded my mother that I had told her the same thing, and guess what? My advice was free. She didn't have to go pay for the doctor. But I guess my mother didn't believe one of us because she took Fudge to see 3 different doctors. None of them can find anything wrong with my brother. One doctor even suggested that my mother cook Fudge his favorite foods. So that night my mother boiled lamb chops just for Fudge. The rest of us ate some stew. She served him 2 little lamb chops on his plate under the table. Just the smell of them was enough to make my stomach growl. I thought it was mean of my mother to make them for Fudge, and not for me and Dad. Fudge looked at his lamb chops for a few minutes, then he pushed the plate away. "No," he said, "no chops." "Fudge, you're going to starve," my mother cried. "You must eat." "No chops, cornflakes," Fudge said. "I want some cornflakes." My mother ran to get the cereal for Fudge. "You can eat the chops if you want them, Peter," she told me. I reached down and I helped myself to the lamb chops. My mother handed Fudge his bowl of cereal, but he didn't eat it. He sat at my feet and looked up at me. He watched me eat his pork chops. "Eat your cereal," my father said. "No, no cereal," Fudge yelled. My father was starting to get really upset. His face turned bright red and he said, "Fudge, you will eat that cereal right now." This was turning out to be no fun at all, I thought. The lamb chops were really tasty. I dipped them in some ketchup and I chewed away. Fudge messed around with his cereal for a minute. Then he looked at my father and said, "No eat, no eat, no eat." My father wiped his mouth on a napkin, pushed back the chair, and got it from the table. He picked up the bowl of cereal in one hand and Fudge in the other. He carried them both into the bathroom. I went along, nibbling on my lamb chop, to see what was going to happen. My father stood Fudge in the tub and dumped the whole bowl of cereal on his head. Fudge screamed. He sure can scream loud. My father motioned for me to go back to the kitchen. He joined us in a minute. We sat down and we finished our dinner. Fudge kept on screaming. My mother wanted to go help him, but my father told her that she needed to stay with us. He'd had enough of Fudge being silly at mealtimes. It was not appropriate. I think my mother really was relieved that my father had taken over. For once my brother got what he deserved, and I was glad. The next day Fudge sat at the table again like a normal boy. He sat in his little red chair where he belongs. He ate everything that my mom put in front of him. "No more being a doggy," he told us. And for a long time after this, his favorite expression to say was, "Good thing I ate it, or else maybe I'd have to wear it again."